Suge is coming!
Suge had an apartment full of producers. And he gathered them all up and said, look, either y'all start producing some hits or I'm going to start producing some hits.
There was a time when Suge Knight was one of the most intimidating figures in hip-hop, someone whose presence alone could shift the energy in a room. His grip over Death Row Records gave him serious power, and most people didn't dare challenge him. But one person who never seemed fazed was 50 Cent. When 50 hit the scene, he carried himself with a level of confidence that made it clear intimidation wasn't going to work on him. There was a real sense that Suge couldn't get inside his head, and some even believed Suge was cautious enough to step back rather than escalate things with 50. By the time Suge crossed paths with 50, his life story was already packed with moments that shaped his reputation. Born Marion Hugh Knight Jr. in Compton, he earned the childhood nickname Sugar Bear, which later evolved into the name the industry came to know. Football was his first focus, and he showed promise, but a professional career never materialized. Instead, Suge leaned into his physical presence, moving into concert promotion and celebrity security, where dominance and control were key tools. Working with clients like Bobby Brown, he quickly learned how far intimidation could take him. Over time, that approach became his signature, pressing artists, cornering producers, and forcing label executives to comply. One of the first artists to experience Suge's aggressive tactics was Robert Van Winkle, better known as Vanilla Ice.
He might have got a few punches, and he probably drunk about 20 shots of piss. You know what I mean? Literally.
Suge took me out on the balcony, started talking to me personally. On the balcony, high above, like 15 floors. He had me look over the edge, show me how high I was up there. You scared? I needed to wear a diaper on that day. I was very scared.
Who is Mario Lavelle Johnson? His name is listed.
That's the guy that Suge Knight brought over there that was an acquaintance of mine that had nothing to do with that song.
You signed over the rights?
I signed over the rights to him so that Suge and them could get paid for it.
So Mario Lavelle Johnson didn't write that song?
No way.
Shortly after leaving football and committing fully to the music business, Suge launched his own publishing company. In 1990, Vanilla Ice released Ice Ice Baby, a massive hit that shifted the industry and set the stage for Suge's reputation as someone who took what he wanted and rarely faced consequences. You've probably heard the record before. It did more than just pretty well, it went everywhere. While Vanilla Ice was enjoying massive success from the song, a big slice of that money didn't stay with him. A large portion went straight to Suge Knight, even though the public face of the record was Ice himself.
Like to tell Tupac, keep his guards up, we ride with him.
And then he dissed Puff Daddy.
Any artists out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the records, dancing. Come to Death Row.
Behind the scenes, the track was written by Mario Johnson, who happened to be signed to Suge Knight's agency at the time. That detail mattered because it shifted the power fast. Because of that setup, Ice ended up signing over the royalties, but getting to that point wasn't smooth at all. During those weeks of negotiation, Suge reportedly pulled up on Ice multiple times, always with his bodyguard right there. Rumors started spreading heavy. People whispered that Suge had forced his way into Ice's hotel room and dangled him over a balcony by his ankles. The story sounded wild, and for years it floated around unchecked. That rumor stayed alive until Ice himself shut it down. In 2001, Xenon Pictures released the documentary Welcome to Death Row, breaking down the rise and fall of the label. During one of the interviews, Vanilla Ice addressed the story directly. He said, "He didn't hang me off any balcony, okay? The story's kind of been blown out of proportion."
I don't remember word for word what Pac said to him, but it was real short. And then he just took off. Pac was standing with his hands to the side. He started letting loose on him. He went to the ground, he got up, and Pac let loose again. And Suge had like this ornament or something in his office. It was a red ornament. Sneed was trying to get up under there. You know, like he was trying to get out the way, man. That's what he's trying. It was a lot of thunder happening, man.
And I want to clarify that Suge and I have no bad feelings towards each other. According to Ice, Suge did bring him out to the balcony to talk business. And while the moment was tense and intimidating, it never crossed into physical violence. When you really sit back and think about it, the situation was wild. So many people in the industry were willing to believe that balcony rumor without hesitation, and that alone says everything about the reputation Suge Knight had built in just a few short years. By the early 1990s, Death Row was moving heavy on the West Coast, and Suge was stacking power fast.
Do you think Suge was messing around with her to get at Diddy, or do you think he really liked it?
Yeah. I told you that. Suge's biggest weapon, his war weapon is, to mess with your girl.
Through the DOC, Suge gained direct access to some of the most talented members connected to NWA, and that connection changed everything. A few key things lined up perfectly for Suge during this period. The DOC didn't just want out of NWA, he also wanted to cut ties with Ruthless Records, which was run by Eazy-E. Breaking that contract was not going to be simple, but at the exact same time, Dr. Dre was also looking for the exit. That's where Suge stepped in and flipped the whole board. While it was never officially confirmed, former NWA manager Jerry Heller later claimed Suge used threats to pressure Eazy-E into releasing both Dre and the DOC from their contracts. Whether every detail of that story is true or not, the outcome was clear.
They was not scared of Suge Knight. They was terrified of Suge Knight.
Dre and the DOC were free, and they chose to align with Suge. Together, they became co-founders of Death Row Records. Before getting into Death Row's explosive rise, it's important to understand why Dr. Dre wanted out in the first place. Dre signed with Ruthless Records back in 1987 and quickly became the backbone of the label. As head of production, he was behind multiple successful projects that brought in serious money. But that success came with pressure. Dre was juggling nonstop work, managing several artists at once, and delivering hit after hit. Over time, he started feeling shortchanged by Eazy-E and the label, both financially and creatively. That frustration planted the seed for leaving the group and the label, a decision that would later connect directly to Suge Knight's eventual clash with 50 Cent. Leaving the group had felt impossible for a long time, until Ice Cube proved otherwise back in 1989. Once that door cracked open, there was no shutting it again. Dr. Dre's frustration with Ruthless Records kept growing, and Suge Knight, alongside the DOC, leaned into that tension. Both of them later claimed they went through the label's books with a lawyer and came to the conclusion that Jerry Heller and Eazy-E were shorting Dre financially. That moment was the breaking point. Dre decided he was done with NWA and ready to move on. With that decision made, Dre left NWA and joined forces with the DOC and Suge Knight to build something new. Dre and the DOC were already respected names with money to invest, but Suge's role raised questions. Where did his startup cash come from?
Any artists out there want to be an artist or want to stay a star, don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
The answer circled back to the Vanilla Ice situation. The royalty money Suge secured earlier became part of the foundation that helped launch Death Row Records. Suge moved fast. One of Death Row's earliest moves was handling the title track for the 1992 film Deep Cover. That record didn't just boost Dr. Dre's profile, it also introduced the world to his protege, Snoop Dogg. Not long after, work began on Dre's debut solo album, The Chronic. When it dropped, the impact was immediate. The album reshaped the sound of hip-hop, went triple platinum, and sold nearly 6 million copies worldwide. Dre used the project to fire back at Ruthless Records, while Snoop used it as a launchpad to build his own name. The momentum didn't stop there. In 1993, Snoop released his debut solo album Doggy Style, which went quadruple platinum and received widespread praise, matching the success of The Chronic. As Death Row's influence grew, so did Suge's conflicts, setting the stage for new feuds and even more controversy in the years that followed. At the same time, gangsta rap as a whole was under heavy scrutiny, and the pressure was coming from every direction. Things got even worse when Snoop Dogg was charged with first-degree homicide right around the release of Doggy Style. On top of that, Suge Knight found himself caught in the middle of a growing civil rights campaign aimed directly at gangsta rap. The loudest voice in that movement was C. Dolores Tucker, who aggressively went after Time Warner because one of its subsidiaries distributed Death Row Records. Suge took that personally. So did everyone else at the label. When Tucker later approached Suge about pushing what she called positive hip-hop, he shut that idea down fast. It didn't matter that she claimed she could convince Time Warner to invest $80 million into the concept. Suge wasn't interested in changing the label's image or sound, and the tension between both sides only got worse from there. While all of this was happening, Suge's rivalry with Sean Combs on the East Coast was reaching dangerous levels. Things escalated to the point where Combs reportedly needed bodyguards after receiving serious threats tied back to people connected to Suge. The East Coast versus West Coast divide was growing louder, and Death Row's name was becoming impossible to ignore. Around this time, Suge decided to make his boldest move yet. In 1995, Tupac Shakur was sitting in prison, and the story goes that his mother was close to losing her home. Suge was contacted and quickly sent $15,000 to help stabilize the situation. A few months later, Suge visited Tupac behind bars and posted $1.4 million bail. The expectation was clear. Once released, Tupac would sign with Death Row Records, which is exactly what happened. Tupac's run at Death Row was explosive as the East Coast and West Coast conflict continued to intensify. But the most important shift was happening internally. Dr. Dre was growing uncomfortable with the direction the label was heading, and his next move would quietly set the stage for the eventual clash between Suge Knight and 50 Cent. They definitely had success together, but Suge Knight's constant hunger for conflict, mixed with the escalating East Coast and West Coast tension, started dragging everything down. Death Row Records had a powerful brand, but its reputation was becoming unstable. Suge was growing more unpredictable by the day, and Dr. Dre could see where things were headed. Creating distance started to feel like survival, not betrayal. That distance became reality when Suge was arrested for violating parole and sent back to prison. Not long after, in 1996, Dre officially broke away from Death Row and launched Aftermath Entertainment, operating under Interscope Records, the same parent company Death Row once worked with. That move instantly turned Dre into an enemy in Suge's eyes. And with everything going on at the time, Dre didn't just lose Suge, he also lost Tupac Shakur. At first, Tupac's run with Death Row was electric, but it didn't take long for reality to hit. Tupac began realizing that working under Suge wasn't what it looked like from the outside. Despite bringing in massive money for the label, his own payout didn't reflect that success. People close to the situation suggested Tupac wanted out, but two things kept him stuck. One was loyalty. Suge had helped his mother keep her house and had posted his bail. The other was Tupac's attraction to the street image, something he felt staying close to Suge allowed him to maintain. That loyalty ran deep. When it came time to choose sides, Tupac stood with Suge and turned on Dre publicly. Meanwhile, Aftermath Entertainment was moving in a completely different direction. Dre wasn't chasing volume or chaos. The label focused on precision, patience, and long-term vision. That approach would soon create space for artists like Eminem and 50 Cent, quietly setting the foundation for the next major shift in hip-hop power. Given everything Dr. Dre had already been through with Ruthless Records and Death Row Records, his new approach made sense. Still, the beginning wasn't smooth at all. In November 1996, Aftermath released Dr. Dre Presents The Aftermath, a project meant to signal Dre's shift away from full-on gangsta rap and the chaos of the coastal conflict. The album did earn platinum certification from the Recording Industry Association of America, but fans didn't connect with it long-term, and the momentum faded fast. The next few years didn't help much. Aftermath Entertainment put out several projects that failed to land, and the label barely made a dent in the industry. Whispers started spreading that Aftermath might be burning cash and running out of time. With multiple commercial disappointments piling up, people began questioning whether Dre had lost his touch or if the label was already on life support. Everything shifted in 1998. Jimmy Iovine, the co-founder of Interscope Records, was close with Dre and encouraged him to take a serious look at an up-and-coming artist from Detroit named Marshall Mathers, better known as Eminem. Dre didn't hesitate. He saw the raw talent immediately, signed Eminem to Aftermath, and went straight to work. That collaboration produced the Slim Shady LP, Eminem's debut album. Dre played a hands-on role, producing several tracks and appearing vocally on others. The album sparked controversy across the industry, but it also exploded commercially. Eminem became a star almost overnight, and the project marked Aftermath's first undeniable win as a label. Not long after, Dre released 2001, an album that went 6 times platinum and silenced any doubts about his relevance. With that success, Aftermath's early struggles faded into the background, even as Dre found himself pulled into legal battles that followed him into the next chapter of his career. By the early 2000s, Aftermath Entertainment was fully back on top, and the momentum kept building. Things reached another level in 2002 with the arrival of 50 Cent. Eminem was immediately impressed by 50's hunger, delivery, and raw edge, so he flew him out to Los Angeles to meet Dr. Dre. Dre saw the same potential and didn't waste time, signing 50 to a deal reportedly worth $1 million and jumping straight into album mode. In February 2003, Aftermath released Get Rich or Die Tryin', an album that was hyped as one of the biggest rap debuts in years. The numbers backed it up. The project sold nearly 900,000 copies in its first week and later went 9 times platinum. 50 Cent became unavoidable overnight, and his rise marked a major shift in hip-hop power. It was also around this moment that Suge Knight and 50 Cent officially crossed paths, and it became obvious fast that 50 wasn't someone who could be pressed or shaken. After Tupac Shakur's passing and Suge Knight's prison stints between 1996 and 2001, Death Row Records was barely holding on. While Suge was gone, Dre and Aftermath rose up and took over the lane Death Row once dominated. By 2002, 50 was the hottest name in hip-hop, and Suge knew exactly who he was. He wanted to see him in person. That meeting happened while 50 was filming the video for In Da Club. Once word spread that Suge Knight had arrived on set, the entire atmosphere shifted. Suge had always been intimidating, but his image had darkened over the years. Rumors followed him everywhere, including claims tying him to both Tupac's and the notorious B.I.G.'s passings. Many people in the industry believed Suge had a hand in Biggie's assassinatio, and that reputation alone changed how people reacted the moment he walked into the room. None of those rumors were ever confirmed, but they didn't need to be. When you combine that cloud of suspicion with Suge Knight's already heavy reputation, most people wanted nothing to do with him, especially when he showed up unannounced. That's exactly why tension spiked the moment Suge appeared on set. Bizarre from D12 was there and witnessed the whole exchange. Suge pulled up with nearly 30 men behind him and walked straight towards 50 Cent, while 50's entourage suddenly vanished into the background. There were reports that Eminem was ready to step in and make sure his artist was safe, but it turned out that wasn't necessary. 50 didn't flinch. He walked right up to Suge and his crew and calmly asked what he wanted. Suge didn't respond with words. He took a puff of his cigar, sized the situation up, and walked away. The move was clearly meant to intimidate, but it fell flat. Even years later, people still point to that moment as proof that 50 couldn't be shaken. To this day, nobody knows exactly why Suge showed up to that set. Some people believe part of him was worried that Dr. Dre had brought 50 into the game as a way to challenge him directly. But after that brief face-to-face, it became obvious that 50 wasn't thinking about Suge at all. Once Suge left, 50 went right back to filming what would become one of the most iconic music videos of the era. What Suge failed to understand was who 50 really was. Before linking up with Eminem and Dre, 50 had already survived situations far more serious than industry intimidation. And that history mattered. When 50 signed with Aftermath Entertainment, the way the label moved, operated, and protected its artists shifted completely, setting the tone for everything that came next. From that point on, security became non-negotiable. Everyone in the crew wore bulletproof vests, and they moved in armored vehicles at all times. The team understood that having 50 Cent on the roster meant operating in a high-risk environment where things could change fast. That level of caution wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Like many artists who came up from nothing, 50's background played a huge role in shaping who he became. Born Curtis Jackson, his childhood was rough from the start. His mother was involved in street activity and passed away when he was very young. After that loss, Jackson was raised by his grandparents. Growing up, he spent most of his time trying to stay occupied, whether that meant school, working out, or being influenced by the environment around him. He has openly said that during those years, he was exposed to situations that pushed him toward the streets, something that later became part of his story rather than something he glorified. As he got older, those influences followed him. Just before turning 19, Jackson was arrested after unknowingly selling cocaine to an undercover officer. The situation could have ended much worse, with the possibility of years behind bars. Instead, he was sent to a 6-month boot camp program where he earned his GED. That experience became a turning point. It forced him to slow down and rethink where his life was headed before things spiraled further. Around that time, he adopted the name 50 Cent, which he described as a symbol of transformation rather than crime. In 1996, a friend introduced him to Jam Master Jay of Run DMC. Jam Master Jay saw Jackson's hunger and took him under his wing, teaching him how to build hooks, structure songs, and sharpen his delivery. While his earliest work flew under the radar, that changed once 50 released the controversial and darkly humorous single, How to Rob. The record caught attention fast, and suddenly Curtis Jackson was on the radar of the industry's most powerful players. By that point, 50 was firmly on the radar of major names like Jay-Z, DMX, and the Wu-Tang Clan. He was even invited to tour with Nas during the Nostradamus era. Everything was lining up, and then everything stopped at once. Not long after, 50 Cent was shot multiple times at close range and left fighting for his life. He was hit in his hand, legs, chest, hip, and face, injuries that would have ended most careers on the spot. Against all odds, he survived and recovered within roughly 5 months. The shooter was identified as Daryl Baum, a known associate and bodyguard of Mike Tyson, though Tyson himself was never implicated. Allegations later surfaced pointing toward Kenneth McGriff, with claims that the attack was retaliation after 50 referenced parts of McGriff's past in music. None of that was ever proven in court, but the incident permanently reshaped how people viewed Curtis Jackson. After surviving a difficult upbringing and a near-passing experience, 50 became someone who simply could not be intimidated. That reality mattered when he crossed paths with Suge Knight. Suge's reputation, his entourage, and his usual intimidation tactics had no effect. According to long-standing industry rumors, this wasn't their only encounter. One story claims Suge showed up again with armed associates while 50 was by himself. Even then, 50 stayed calm, protected himself, and refused to show fear. Once again, Suge backed off. Those moments symbolized a larger issue for Suge. His image was cracking and his influence was fading. Not long after, in 2003, Suge ended up back behind bars. While incarcerated, he still tried to exert control from the inside, but his focus wasn't rebuilding Death Row Records. Instead, he poured energy into attacking rivals through interviews and rumors, most notably targeting Snoop Dogg, as his once feared empire continued to slip further out of reach. Suge even managed to sever ties with Corrupt, someone who had given him more chances than most people would have. By this stage, Suge was stuck in a cycle, in and out of prison, talking big about new artists, stirring tension across the industry, but never actually delivering results. Despite all the noise, not a single major album came out under his leadership during this period. If you rewind a bit, Death Row Records wasn't exactly building the future anymore. After Tupac Shakur passed away, the label made significant money releasing 2 posthumous albums. Beyond that, most of their efforts went into re-releasing and remixing old material from Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Those moves brought short-term cash, but they did nothing to develop new stars or secure long-term relevance. The label was living off its past instead of investing in the future. Financial problems piled up every time Suge went back to prison. His behavior grew more erratic, and after his failed intimidation attempts with 50 Cent, things only got worse. By 2006, both Suge Knight and Death Row Records filed for bankruptcy. At that point, Suge had spent more time locked up than free. The label had no major artists, no hit records, and almost zero industry support. Most people wanted nothing to do with him. When Suge filed for Chapter 11, he reportedly owed around $120 million. His creditors included the Internal Revenue Service, Interscope Records, and several former death row artists who claimed they were never properly paid. By every practical measure, death row was finished. Suge's legal trouble didn't stop there. In January 2015, his situation reached a breaking point. He was involved in a fatal incident where Terry Carter was assassinated and filmmaker Clee Sloan was seriously injured. Suge claimed self-defense, but witnesses stated that he followed both men from the set of Straight Outta Compton and deliberately struck them with his vehicle. That moment sealed the final collapse of a man who once ruled hip-hop through fear and power. To keep it simple, Suge Knight was sentenced to 28 years in prison and is currently incarcerated at R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility. He won't even be eligible for parole until October 2034. The man who once ruled hip-hop through fear is now completely removed from the industry he dominated for years. On the other side, 50 Cent ended up with a very different outcome. While he never quite recreated the once-in-a-generation moment of get rich or die trying, he never faded away either. 50 remained a household name branching into television, business, and media. He had setbacks, including filing for bankruptcy, but managed to rebound and stay relevant, even appearing at the Super Bowl halftime show years later. Suge built his power by pushing people, forming the right alliances, and leaning heavily on intimidation. That approach earned him influence, but it also burned bridges fast. Over time, fewer people wanted to work with him, and the fear that once protected him started to wear off. Eventually, someone was going to stand their ground. That person turned out to be 50 Cent. When 50 arrived, he looked like an easy target on paper, new face, loud mouth, fresh success. But he wasn't built like the people Suge was used to pressing. Their brief encounters symbolized something bigger. The tactics that once worked no longer did. Suge's control slipped, his label collapsed, his reputation faded, and the industry moved on without him. In the end, the same fear-based strategy that built Suge Knight's empire also guaranteed its collapse, while 50 Cent walked away standing, still relevant and still unshaken. In the end, 50 Cent stayed in his own lane and focused on building something bigger than fear or reputation. That choice made sure his name would be remembered far more positively than Suge Knight ever was. Their brief run-ins made one thing clear. Suge knew 50 was different, and every instinct he had told him this wasn't someone he could press or control. For the first time, Suge ran into a man who didn't flinch, didn't fold, and didn't care about his image or threats. That's the real reason Suge Knight feared 50 Cent. That wraps up the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to comment your thoughts, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who love hip-hop history. Check out one of the videos on screen, and I'll see you on the next one.